Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. Dr. Archil Sikharulidze joins us today to discuss the latest developments in the estrangement of Georgia and the West. We also have a very interesting section about the cutoff of US aid from countries like Georgia and Armenia. Archil is the founder of the Sikha Foundation in Tbilisi, and he is a specialist in international relations, focusing on Russia, Georgia, and the region.
Folks, before we begin, first of all, thank you for supporting us, and please continue to do that. If you'd like to know how, go to podcasts.groong.org/donate, and there you can learn how to become a sustaining member using Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. And even if you just want to do a one-shot donation, we would really appreciate it. And in addition to that, or especially if you can't make a financial contribution, consider commenting, liking, and sharing our podcast, especially commenting on YouTube. Really helps us increase our engagement.
Hovik, one more thing. We haven't been pushing our Substack very much until now, but we are a little more active recently on our Substack channel, which is also, I think, groong.substack.com. So go there. We are publishing over there as well.
So thank you, and on with the show.
Dr. Archil Sikharulidze, welcome back to the show.
Thanks
Welcome,
for
Archil.
inviting me again. My first time in 2025. Hope
Yes.
not the last one.
Hopefully not the last time.
Archie, let's begin with this recent scandal around USAID. NGO employees throughout the region, in Armenia, in Ukraine, etc., are on social media now complaining about their funding and looking for alternative sources. For instance, in Ukraine, there are reports that more than half of all media, I think the specific estimate is 60%, but some estimates go even more, are in crisis mode due to cuts in funding. Even though that this is supposed to be a temporary, like a 90-day freeze, there are essentially panicking across the board. What is the situation like in Georgia? And given the role of USAID, I wanted to get your general thoughts over the years. What was all the money used for in Georgia? And also maybe if you could talk about the effect that it might have in Georgia in the near and long-term future.
Well, first of all, thank you once again for inviting me. Secondly, if I'm not mistaken, it was 8 out of 10 media in Ukraine. So it's like almost 80% of all media were financed by USAID in Ukraine. Now, let me just briefly remind your audience our last talk. You probably remember that I said Georgian Dream was waiting for Donald Trump to take the office. So Georgia Dream, especially Irakli Kobakhidze, Prime Minister of Georgia, was reiterating the same formula. Once Trump comes to office, we are ready to restart our relations with the United States of America. Georgian Dream used to emphasize that the reason why Georgia is no more, in quotes, democracy, no more eligible for democracy support and integration to the Western world is because Georgia refused to engage to a war against Russia. The Georgian government refused to help the Western world to bring to Russia strategic defeat. That was the main narrative. So there were some rumors that this may happen, may not happen, but what we see now that by freezing these USAID assets, Trump is maybe not directly, but indirectly supporting the Georgian Dream. Because now, once Georgian NGOs and political opposition are not supported by American administration financially, politically, they need to find another source for legitimacy. So on the one hand, maybe, and I'm sure Trump is indirectly supporting Georgian Dream in its narratives, but on the other hand, it's also directly helping Georgian Dream by cutting financial assistance to all those opponents of Georgian Dream. We all know that USAID and other foundations like Soros, they used to support local TV channels, NGOs, other agencies that were actually in the position to the government. So by making this step, Georgian Dream hoped that all these protests that we still see from time to time will be over. Because without money for 3 months, it's a lot. And Georgian Dream hope that these people don't have enough resources without the further support to continue fight against the current government. One more thing that I should emphasize, when we speak about the scandal, we should keep in mind that USAID not only supported oppositional movements, TV channels, and other people, but they also used to maintain research in Georgia. So on the one hand, you definitely can say that this cut-off will help political system to stabilize. But on the other hand, we should realize that some other programs that were focused on like cancer treatment, like supporting social challenges in Georgia, these programs will be closed too. And so Georgian Dream is on the one hand very happy that they can finally get rid of American administration in Tbilisi. So American ambassador is so silent. I mean, she's Robert Danigan simply disappeared. I mean, no one knows where is she. She is so silent because I would argue she understands that the winter is coming, probably, or maybe even has come finally. But on the other hand, the government must be very cautious, because if all of those programs will be closed, the question is, who shall support Georgian citizens who were getting money from America? And once again, it's not only about financing processes, it's also financing research, treatment, and some really, really good projects. That is why, obviously, Georgian NGO sector is in a deep crisis. Georgian Dream is winning from this, but we should keep in mind the Georgian population is highly dependent on foreign aid. And if this aid is cut off, then Georgian Dream must be ready to replace it.
So let me talk about something specifically related to the recent elections. For the elections in 2024, in total, they had allocated $40 million. I don't have the exact date when the allocation started, but that sounds like a hell of a lot of money. And it went towards this thing called Consortium for Elections and Political Process Strengthening. So I just want to inject my own commentary here, because those of us from the US know the amount of scandal this little thing called Russiagate caused. I guess in 2016, 8 years ago. And the allegation there was that a Russian troll farm had bought $100,000 worth of ads on social media. So compare that with 40 million. What was the 40 million used for, Archil? And do you think it had an effect on the Georgian elections? Maybe not on the final outcome, but on the maybe margin by which Georgian Dream won and the political processes that preceded and followed it.
Well, let me express two standpoints. On the one hand, we have those who oppose Georgian Dream, and those who truly believe that these 40 millions were allocated to Georgian civil society, and Georgian civil society was working hard to make sure that elections will be transparent, accountable, and that those who had not enough resources were paid enough to maintain observation and to avoid being pressured by the government. This is one narrative. On the other hand, Georgian Dream says that the reason why they launched this whole foreign agent law process was because they knew that this money were allocated, and they asked USAID, they asked American ambassador to make it transparent, to, as you said, what they paid for. This was a very basic question, but they got zero answer. US ambassador said that by asking this question, you are insulting America, you are insulting our strategic partnership, and you simply saying don't have a right to know what we are paying in Georgia, and be thankful that we are paying you 40 millions. If you ask me, for me, and I can bring lots of examples when American ambassador, American senators, congressmen, European politicians were directly involved in pre-election campaign. So every single day, the Russian colleagues were threatening, engaging with the Georgian population, telling them directly that you should not vote for Georgian Dream. And if you ask me, I think that the probably 80% of all this money went for anti-Georgian Dream promotion ads. I would bet that they went on creating new platforms, new initiatives, new movements, some advertisements on social media opposing Georgian Dream. And I think this is the reason why Biden administration, Robert Danigan said and told Georgian Dream that it's not your business. We are paying and you should be happy. That is why the scandal about 40 millions is so serious. If they spend this money on cancer treatment, on some social programs, it would be fine. But we all know that all of this went on political propaganda, and plus, I think it was Irakli Kobakhidze once again who said that they just found out that America was financing oppositional TV channel in Georgia that is probably one of the strongest opponent of the government, and which is also in close relation with the local NGO and oppositional parties. So simply saying, Georgian money, American money went to opposition pockets to plan protests, to plan pre-election campaign, and to fight Georgian Dream. Well, I think this is the problem. So the issue why it is scandalous is because this money were used to help opposition to win in elections. But we all know that elections were lost till nowadays. These people have no real documents to prove that these elections were stolen. And now this money is used to finance protests on a regular basis. And plus, we also know that this money were also used to pay fines for political activists. So every day when political activists used to block the road and then being arrested, they knew that their fines would have been paid by American money in the same day.
Interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so by doing this, political activists knew that it doesn't matter how many times
the US has their back.
Fined. Yes,
yeah.
yes. So they knew that American money that there's enough budget to pay hundreds of thousands of fines. And you know that this system creates the narrative that you won't be punished. It means that you can go till the end. And that is the problem.
I mean, we're talking about those fines being just the cost of doing business for them, which is absolutely wrong.
You know, I have one more comment to make. I think it's very easy, and my heart goes out to legitimate people who worked on legitimate projects funded by USAID. But that is essentially, to me, a deal with the devil. Because it would be nice if USAID had a nice reputation, right? You know, never being involved in any regime change operations. But I mean, I was just looking at, I have this open right now by accident. You know, the US secretly created the Cuban Twitter. You know, this is from 2010. Or actually more than 10 years ago, but the USAID secretly, and one of the conditions was they shouldn't mention who the founder is, created a social network to appeal to ordinary Cubans, and it was intended to talk about sports and things that would normally interest Cubans, but not politics. And then, you know, at one point in time, they would flip the switch or try to farm out who would be the targets of their propaganda, and then they would specialize, they would serve specialized content to these targets to do regime change in Cuba. That was I think the intended goal of that program. So Unfortunately, USAID is a regime change operation. And to me, any discussion, well, they were funding some good programs and we're throwing baby out with the bathwater, should not be had because, in essence, USAID involvement was malignant to begin with, malicious, and therefore all those secondary arguments should not be even had, in my opinion.
Let me add one more thing, if I may. The issue with USAID is not that it finances on regime changes. We all know that it finances. I mean, I never questioned this because we all know this really nice Russian joke. The only reason why COP never happened in USA because they don't have American embassy in USA. Now, this is a very widely used like phrase in the post-Soviet space. But the problem here is that USAID unfortunately turned the local civil societies into what I call hired civil societies. So they created a group, they created a group of people who were on the one hand doing a really nice job, but on the other hand, once needed, they were turned into political agitators and parties and then driven to protest. And this is actually nothing new. I will remind you that in 2003, during the Rose Revolution, all those revolutionaries were from human rights organizations. So they just went from civil society to the government. And now half of the civil society members were arrested, jailed, and they lost the European Court on Human Rights. You know, for what was the allegation? Torture, inhuman and degrading treatment. So this was the huge blow, and it is unfortunate, the huge blow for Georgian civil society because people, the trust level to civil society dropped dramatically. If you look at CRRC Georgia research, amount of people who trust civil society of Georgia is probably 10% fully. And like, I mean, it's like, imagine that you have a civil society that should represent your country, and only 20% of population actually trust it. This is the biggest, if you ask me, damage that USAID inflicted on Georgian civil society.
At this point, you can tell Trump that he's not getting his money's worth. His ROI is very low on his $40 million. Archil, we last talked on November 30th, 2024, and we reviewed the aftermath of the Georgian elections at the end of October 2024. In mid-December, Western-backed protests continued in Tbilisi, and they were led primarily by former President Salome Zurabishvili. Her term ended in mid-December, but she continued claiming that she was the lone legitimate president and ruler of the country. And then she also attended the inauguration of Donald Trump in January. In that role, she was invited as the president of Georgia. At that time, she also met a lot of the major incoming secretaries of the Donald Trump cabinet. And as of January 6th, she's actually joined the Arizona State University's McCain Institute. She's a Kissinger Fellow there. Meanwhile, back at home, there are some developments. The ruling party, Georgian Dream, and the EU continue their escalating row. Georgian Dream froze its drive for EU membership, and last week they also recalled Georgia's many representatives from the PACE, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. What's the reason for this deepening estrangement? What's going on between the two entities?
Well, let me try to be objective neutral. Once again, opposition members say that this is because of democracy backsliding, and civil society members, Salome Zurabishvili, argue that Georgian Dream is led by pro-Russian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, and that Georgian Dream is building dictatorship in the country. Mainstream bureaucracy in the West, like Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, Nicolas Sarkozy, they indirectly supported opposition. Joe Biden was much more moderate, just saying that maybe you should reconsider results of your elections. What I would say, they simply were trying hard to overthrow the government. They hoped to manage it by elections. They failed, and we spoke that it's already 3 months since elections, and no actual document has been produced proving this. So then there were attempts to push government, appoint new elections because of the protests, but the government said that I have enough power and enough will to suppress protesters. What actually it done? So if you look what's going on in Georgia, in Tbilisi, in front of the parliament building every day, at 10 p.m., some 400, 500 people gather, they shout, they block road for 2 hours, and they go home. So I call it Twitter revolution, because if you look at Georgia during the days, nothing is happening, and just for 3-4 hours in the evening, they come out, they take pictures on cameras bought by the Western money, and then the whole Twitter and Facebook is flooded by these pictures of a continuous protest. What happened now? Trump came, and there is a clear understanding that no more American money and support is coming. There is no proof the Georgian Dream fabricated elections, and I will say that the same was reiterated by Salome Zurabishvili. You said about PASA assembly that has no actual jurisdiction, said that we don't have proof too, but because you have some elections that we don't like you should appoint new elections. And Georgian Dream representative said that, well, we are sorry, but we don't see the reason. And they simply left the assembly. That was the whole deal. So there is a political will among European politicians to just appoint another elections, but it's not about appointing new elections. It's about appointing every day new elections unless opposition wins. That is the problem. Because I would really, really doubt, even if today Georgian Dream appoints new elections, that opposition will win. Because even if you look at protests, there is no opposition. Opposition is in extremely enormous crisis. So we can probably argue that Georgia has no opposition at all. This is marginalized people. Joe Biden and others, they bet on these marginalized groups, and they dramatically failed. They really, really failed. And if you look at Georgian protesters, even they say that we hate these people. So the Georgian opposition is non-existent at all. And now they're trying to somehow create some social movements and then transform these social movements into political movements. Like example, they're trying to bring some people from various industries, like musicians, painters, people from the art, like journalists. But as far as what I can see, the problem is that this is the same people who supported the same opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no new narrative, no new ideology. All those people who signed some petitions, these are the same old faces. That is why by nowadays, Georgian Dream is nominally and officially the leading power. And I would just remind you, 2 days ago, Irakli Kurbakidze, the Georgian prime minister, is not recognized by opposition here, but civil society here, was interviewed by Euronews Georgia, and he was officially proclaimed he as a Georgian PM. So, I mean, Euronews proclaims him as a PM, but Kaya Kallas does not recognize him. That he doesn't. I mean, what is funny, and I will end it up here. What actually Kurbakidze said correctly, he said that when European bureaucrats want to write a letter to me, they call me Georgian prime minister. I mean, by doing so, they agree that I am elected prime minister. But when it comes to political narratives, they don't call me a prime minister. I mean,
Yeah.
that is the main problem. But for nowadays, the only revolution we see, I call it a Twitter revolution. I mean,
Um,
only on social media. That's all.
Archil, you,
Do you think Euronews was also receiving USAID funding? And now that
Well,
they're not,
I,
sorry.
I can't say probably because Politico. I mean, how many newsletters were there? One more data for you, for your audience. The biggest aid went to Ukraine, and Georgia was second in the list. So now think carefully. Georgia is 10, 20 times smaller than Ukraine. It's a very small country. So ask yourself why, look, why our country was financed as big as to be allocated on the second place in the whole list in the post-Soviet space. I will remind you that in the post-Soviet space there are 15 countries, and Georgia is probably like Armenia among the smallest one.
One of the smallest, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you take the ratio between money and the important and the country and population, it shows how actually, and this is very important, how important Georgia is. Because by the end of the day, Georgia still remains the only real strategic part of the United States of America and the West in the post-Soviet space. But, and this is what is frustrating, they managed to do everything possible to make Georgian dream, which is pro-American, pro-Western by all means, and they voters anti-Western, Western. So if you speaking about the deal that Asbed said, this was the worst deal ever. I mean, they are broken, if you ask me, in this
yeah,
sense.
the return on investment has been very low. Archil, Georgian Dream has been accused of being pro-Russian, and you've written extensively about Russian-Georgian relations. So one would think that if these people are now in power and Georgia-West relations are tanking, then Georgia-Russia relations are probably on the mend. What is the status of Russian-Georgian relations currently?
You know, I always like to say that nothing new on the northern front. I mean, every time when people say that Georgia is going to, and this is the really beloved narrative by some American congressmen like Joe Wilson, who said that Bedina Ivanishvili is in charge of all dictatorships in the world, and that Georgia is not going to Russian orbit, but we are already in Russia. So if you read narrative, we are also already in Magadan, in Novorossiysk, and I mean, we Georgians said that it would have been laugh if not cryable, you know, because the narrative itself showed that Georgia is already like a Belarus, but and this is what I always point to. The Georgia is probably the best ever dictatorship in history, because if we are at the close allies with Russia, why do we have every single Western embassy in Georgia? Why do we have so many foreign aid from the West? And why do we have 4 oppositional channels against 2 pro-governmental? I mean, this is the best dictatorship we ever had in humankind, you know? And plus, once again, if you take variables and if you see how many things are being controlled by Russian side in Georgia, then Mikhail Saakashvili and his oppositional movement nowadays was the biggest pro-Russian power in Georgian history. Because if you check the strategic infrastructure that was bought by Russia during Saakashvili, it was enormous amount. So to generalize, nowadays Georgia government is as pro-Russian as it was previously. Nothing actually changed. Nothing new, no new initiatives. We still have no diplomatic relations, contradictory to Ukraine that still has a diplomatic relations with Russia. We still don't have any new ideas how to solve disputed territories, or how Georgians call it, occupied territories of Abkhazia and Tkhemalli region. So the reason why Georgian Dream is, I said it once again, is called pro-Russian is because Georgia Dream decided not to join fully sanctions against Russia because this would have destroyed Georgian economy. Because Georgian Dream said, let's have a direct flight with Russia and let's let Russian tourists to come to Georgia. These three indicators are reasons why some call Georgian Dream pro-Russian, but factually, nothing new is happening. And as I said previously, not if we would like to see something new, it's up to Moscow to go ahead. Moscow must initiate some new processes, but probably you don't know. If I'm not mistaken, it was on Friday. For the first time, for the last few decades, Abkhazia and Russia started direct flights. So this was not the best step if you consider Georgia-Russia relations, because every initiative from the Russian side that engages Abkhazia and Tkhemalli region as an independent, separate countries will definitely hurt Georgian-Russian relations. And this fact actually once more showed that Russia is not ready to move on with Georgian side and recognize Abkhazia and Tkhemalli region as a sovereign territories of Georgia. That is why all these arguments that Georgian Dream and Bidzina Ivanishvili sold Georgia to get Abkhazia and Tkhemalli are factually, if you ask me, fake news.
Archil, 10 days ago, Irakli Kobakhidze, Prime Minister of Georgia, and an entourage of ministers arrived in Yerevan. It was a working visit, and there were statements about partnership and good relations. Foreign Minister Maka Bochorishvili reiterated Georgia's offer to facilitate peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, we know that Azerbaijan is not interested in any mediators, including Western mediators, and Armenia, under Pashinyan, definitely is not interested in Russian mediation. And in addition to all this, the bilateral talks between Pashinyan and Aliyev are not going so great. I mean, if you ask Aliyev, they're going, he's dictating and Aliyev is implementing, but it seems like on key points there is not even progress, or not even I wouldn't say even they're stalled. I would say they're regressing. So what's in it for Georgia to stick its neck out and try to help facilitate these negotiations? And in your opinion, do you think there is a chance for success? And let me also remind our listeners that a week ago, I believe, or maybe it was just before this visit, Kobakhidze was in Baku and proposed a trilateral cooperation initiative between the three South Caucasus countries. So essentially, 3 + 3 - 3. Can you talk about those two things maybe at one shot, sort of, because I think
Of
they're
course.
related.
I remember a few years ago, I wrote a paper about uncovered directions of Georgia's foreign policy, where I was saying that Georgia's Europeans led it to some neo-communist views that the Georgia must be either with the West or it shouldn't be at all. Thanks God to USAID, Donald Trump, and that we are not beloved by the West anymore. Irakli Kobakhidze, Georgian Dream realized that there is actually the rest of the world except the United States of America and EU. So just ask yourself, colleagues, how many times Kobakhidze was in Armenia before 2022? Probably once, maybe for the last 12 years. But nowadays we see Kobakhidze, Garibashvili, Bochorishvili. I mean, like the whole descent, the whole I don't know, Georgian special task force to Armenia and Baku. So what is the reason? Let's look at this from Georgian perspective. So the West turned back on Georgia because we are not good enough now. We are not ready to help the West to defeat Russia. So what Georgian Dream must do? It must finally start talking with its neighbors. Finally, I mean, and that is why ask yourself, who actually congratulated Georgian Dream with the victory? Erdogan, Aliyev, Pashinyan, like president of Iran, Kazakhstan. So Georgian Dream, because of geopolitical shift, was forced out of the zone, comfort zone, and instead of going to Brussels and like saying that we are once again ready to join EU, they were forced to finally focus on neighborhood. And the next question is, okay, what Georgia can offer actually? I mean, we are very small. We don't have gas, oil. We can offer, you remember what I told you, we can offer independent, neutral, objective platform in Tbilisi. And that's what actually Bochorishvili said. She said, we cannot join 3+3 because there is a Russia and people are not ready yet. Because we've been telling these people for 20 years that we are not going to talk with Russians without Americans. No more Americans on the ground. So we want to, but we cannot because we need to prepare people for this, you know. But we can say, let's do it like Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. And what I said, this is what's happening. Now, Georgian Dream is forced to finally work with, and I remind you that also Kobakhidze went to Kazakhstan. I mean, how many times Kobakhidze was in Kazakhstan? Never, ever in his life. Probably he just found out that Kazakhstan exists in Central Asia. I won't be surprised if he even finds out that there's a Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. I mean, as we say, some bad stuff are very useful for your brain development, you know. That is why what I think that and once again, sorry for bringing Georgian perspective, but we should understand that this is not, as you said, it's not because Kobakhidze decided that let's help our brothers in Armenia. Unfortunately, not. It's because
we're definitely talking with you so that you can give us the Georgian perspective. I'm sure it's not because of our beautiful eyes that the relationships are flourishing.
So from Georgian perspective, people are looking at it saying, like, what the hell is going on? I mean, why Kobakhidze is not in Brussels, Washington, London? Because there is nothing to catch there, you know? And so that is why he is so active in South Caucasus. Because now, once he got legitimacy from his neighbors, he needs to make an offer. And this offer, and I'm pretty serious about this, is actually not something that we should laugh on. Because as you said, Hovik, people don't trust the West, people don't trust Russia, don't trust Turkey. But if you ask both, like my Armenian colleague, Azerbaijani colleague, who do you trust? They will say Georgians. We know that you don't have interests. So I truly believe if Bochorishvili and Kobakhidze will push forward saying that, well, look, Tbilisi is fully independent. Look, Russia doesn't like us, West doesn't like us. We are ready to host your meeting. I don't know whether the peace treaty will be signed or not, as you said. But even if we manage to bring these people to meet in Tbilisi, not in Tajikistan, in Canada, it will be a great success, I think, for South Caucasus, for our unity, and for Tbilisi, it will be a tremendous achievement, because finally Tbilisi can be not an addition to the European continent, but a center of the peace talks in South Caucasus. And this is very important. And one more thing, I do really consider this as the first step toward introducing 3+3, because once you have Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, the next step is bringing Turkey, Iran, and of course the Russian Federation. This is inevitable. But as I said, like in Armenia, you need to prepare people for some narratives, in Azerbaijan too. In Georgia, narrative that we don't talk with Russians without like big brother. This narrative was so strong that if you just try even to change it, you may have serious problems. So we need to prepare people
Archil,
step by step.
I think your rebuilding of the 3+3 from the inside out is very interesting because as it is built, the 3+3 was built from the outside in, right? It was the big three that suddenly decided, I think it was Turkey that proposed it initially, right? And then to include all the smaller countries of the South Caucasus. But now if you rebuild it with the South Caucasus and looking out, I think it's going to be an interesting idea. But with this renewed regional focus that Georgia has, and we have heard Pashinyan also, he went to Washington, D.C., and he's talking about this quote unquote balanced and balancing foreign policy that he is starting to discuss everywhere. In fact, he discussed it at an extremely NATO adjacent Atlantic Council just this past week, and we will talk about that in our week in review later. But with these two happening right now, what do you think Georgia's fallout with the EU is going to have as an effect on Armenia, which is, at least to us, it seems like it is still very much Western oriented?
Well, because I do make research on Armenia, I know that people don't like Pashinyan, including those people who support him. So there are two standpoints with that here. He is not enough pro-Western because he still keeps Armenia dependent on Russian money. And on the other hand, I hear Russians who are saying that he is not our guy, he is a pro-Western. So if we take this, what you said, his balancing approach, what he says, maybe this is something that Georgia didn't manage to achieve, because our pragmacy came with a huge cost. 2008 war, recognition of Abkhazia and Tkhinvali region as independent states by Russian Federation. So if this balancing approach will be implemented, this is maybe the better scenario in general for Armenia, something that we didn't manage to. But, and here's the but, Armenia, and I said it plenty times, it cannot be pro-European and cannot make any significant steps toward the West without Georgian being direct. I mean, it's unimaginable. Just look at the map.
That's right.
Yeah, look at the geopolitics. So for Georgia, the connection to NATO was Turkey. Connection to EU was the Black Sea, maybe like Ukraine somehow. Now we are cut off. So, but for Armenia, this is definitely Georgia. If Georgia is not pro-European, is not pro-Western anymore, Armenia cannot be pro-Western by default. That is why what I hear is that lots of Georgian NGOs moved to Armenia to continue their work, to what they call restore democracy in Georgia, meaning turning Georgia what I call radical pro-European, pro-Western. But if you ask me, this time is not gonna come back next like few decades. So the era of radical pro-Europeanism is over. In Georgia, we are seeing the era of pragmatic approach. It doesn't mean it's pro-Russian. The majority are still pretty much oriented on integration with the European Union, but without fanatism. No more self-inflicted harm. No more like sending troops for NATO to die for NATO. Nothing else. So in this sense, and that is, I think, why Bochorishvili went to Armenia. Also, the main message was, if you are keeping balance, we are with you. So let's be together. Now, up to Pashinyan now, because Georgia has no other option now. We have no diplomatic relations with Russia. Russia is not ready to make some steps backward. On the other hand, the West is very angry on us. There are some hopes that Trump may change, but Trump will be focused more on Russia, on Ukraine, on Gaza. So we need allies. Azerbaijan is independent, doesn't care about the EU, doesn't care about Russia because it has Turkey. So that's why Bochorishvili and Aoud and Kobahidze went there to send a clear message to Pashinyan. If you will be neutral, balancing, let's communicate, let's be together. Because we also don't have like one ally. We need to diversify our people and our politics.
All right, Archil. Thank you so much for talking with us. We'll leave it there for today.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Thank you.
That's our show today, and this episode was recorded on February 9, 2025. We've been talking with Dr. Archil Sikharulidze, who is a founder of the Tbilisi-based research institute Sikha Foundation in the Republic of Georgia. He holds degrees in international relations and focuses on Russian and Islamic studies, as well as political processes and international relations in Ukraine, the South Caucasus, and Kazakhstan, and he writes extensively for various local and international platforms. For more information, as always, you can go to podcasts.groong.org/episode number to get more information on all of us, me, Hovik, guest. Also, you can go to podcasts.groong.org/donate and be a supporter. I'm Asbed Bedrossian.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan, and I'll add my spiel as well. Please add your comments. Let us know how we're doing.
Comments. We love comments. We read them all, and sometimes we reply. So, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.